Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So I received this the other day. This is from a Canadian company called Resin Works, and this is their castable resin. They saw one of our previous YouTube videos about the Prusa printer, and they just sent this to us. They wanted to see, get some of our feedback, and they wanted to get our, how well it works, our opinion of how well it works. So as it stands, I've actually got a project, a castable project that I wanted to do anyway. So rather than printing with the Prusa castable stuff, we're going to print with this stuff, and we'll see how it works. So let's unbox it and see what we got. Okay, cool. So a little bit different than the Prusa bottles, but it really doesn't matter too much. Oh, and this is like super sealed, but it's clear, so we'll just go through it. On the back, let's see if I can get the camera to see this. On the back here, which I quite like, compared to other resins, this has actually got all the information that I really need. So when you're doing casting, specifically lost wax, you need to know what the burnout cycle is. And this actually shows it right here. So this is very handy. Most of them don't have that, and it's a little bit frustrating. All the paperwork, MSDS, cleaning, post-curing. So pretty much everything you need is on the bottle, which is very handy. It saves a lot of trouble having to, scour the internet and find the information you're looking for that may or may not have been published yet. Anyway, so it says shape well, as normal. Let's get the printer on. You might recall from the printer, some of the previous printer videos if you've been following along with the channel. I like to turn the printer on first because the bed tilts, which helps stir the resin and it peels the layer away from the film. I like to get it started because in the resting position, the bed is like this, and then in working, it's like that. And there's little marks on the back of the tank that tell you what the percentage of the tank is. So better to have it flat than full. All right. The Prusa stuff was green. This stuff is purple. I've always kind of wondered with these resins, does the color matter too much? I mean, how black absorbs the sunlight, it absorbs the heat, whereas white reflects it. I've been kind of wondering, does the UV light color, or the color of the resin matter with the UV light? But anyway, I guess we'll find out. This stuff doesn't smell, I notice as well, which is maybe a feature, I don't know. Anyway. So I filled it up to 70%, and I'm going to show you the program that we're going to be running today. Shortly, we're going to cut that. We had to alter some of the exposure times with this. They told us all the information we needed, and I'm pretty sure it's already on the bottle. But they are not, because this is not in the Prusa slicer, you can't just go down to the drop-down menu and select it, and it won't have all the presets. So we had to kind of manually do that. But it's not that big a deal. I mean, there's only really a few settings you have to mess with at all. And that's the layer heights, exposure times, it's pretty simple, honestly. All right, so let's load this up. Resin is in the tank. And that one. So this one we're running at the Ultra detail, which is 0.025 millimeter, which I think is 25 micron. Might be wrong. I think it's 25 micron. Anyway, so like I showed you before in the screen grab thing, we're doing this without support because they're just a flat topped ring. They have a little bit of text on one side, so we made sure that side was up. And we're going to go supportless, and that's going to save cleanup later on. In theory, this is actually a bit kind of a test. Like I've done one before, but this one is going to be kind of more official, hopefully castable. And this is going to save us cleanup from having to snip the supports, and ultimately that'll save time. So for after this, we're going to have to attach them to the sprue material. But I mean, I could print that in, but in this case, I think it's more affordable just to attach them by hand because it doesn't take very long. So even at ultra detail, because this is only going to be about that tall, this is only going to take about an hour and 40 minutes or something like that. So it'll be a fairly quick print. Okay, so print just finished, and we're going to get it all cleaned up. I got a little paranoid this is actually print number 2. I got a little bit paranoid with the first one. So currently we have, they actually all worked out. They're only half printed though, but we figured we'd test them anyway for the cure and figure out what kind of times that requires. So that looks pretty good to me. As soon as it's not dripping resin everywhere, I'll bring it up to the camera and you can see. So this was supportless, as I mentioned before, and they're printed right to the bed flat. And I feel like it saves on a lot of time because with this particular printer, it doesn't matter how many are across the bed, it's always about height. So if it's 5 inches tall, it might take 10 hours. If it's, only a 1/4 inch, it could take an hour. Depending on detail level, of course. Still dripping. All right, good enough. So obviously hard to see any detail in there. It's still covered in resin, but we'll put this through the isopropyl and get this all nice and cleaned up. I'm going to have to interrupt this cure. There's only 1.5 minutes left out of 10 minutes, so hopefully that's okay. As soon as I'll actually take these off, and then I'll talk about them while this is washing. There we go. And start wash. Okay. So, like I was mentioning before, this is a half print. And it was just because I got paranoid. I didn't hear the FVP foil peeling off, as I've heard with others. You kind of hear like it's like a snare drum, like a very tiny snare drum, as the resin separates from the foil. So I didn't hear that, and I was kind of worried, and I decided to stop it. But anyway, it doesn't look too bad. There's a little bit of like layer separation right down here. But actually, it's odd. It's in the same spot every time. This is one of those things where we have no idea really how well things are going to work out every single time. I'm not too worried about that. I mean, even if it is separated that little bit right there, even if it is separated a little bit right there, I can always go back with just a tiny bit of liquid wax, and I can fill that in, and then the cast will come out perfect. It won't really matter too much. Obviously, that's not ideal. We want them to print perfectly every single time, but in terms of, overall success, this isn't too bad. Just offhand here, I'll show you how much flex there is. So this is after about, I'm going to say 25 minutes. Well, let's say half an hour cure time. I'm approximating about 25-minute cure time, On the bottle, it recommends that we go 30 to 40 minutes of cure time until it's brittle. When it first came out, like what's in here now, just being cleaned, they're flexible. They don't feel flexible in the sense of like they'll bend and break, but definitely kind of jelly-like. I guess we'll see. Okay. Oops. Well, I'm seeing a little bit of artifact. Well, maybe not artifact. Artifact causes holes. That's a problem with the screen. Just seeing, like, you know how we were seeing that D-lam on the bottom, seeing a little bit on that one, a little bit on that one. Maybe the rings weren't perfectly flat, like maybe it was like 89.99 degrees or something, and that made some difference to it. It's hard to say exactly. So we use the scraper. Alrighty, so there. Just going to arrange these in such a way that they get enough airflow. There's these hexagon patterns underneath in the CW1 that allow the hot air to circulate and dry all the isopropyl off, and allow some of the light to bounce underneath, I think. I mean, it's probably not the main feature, but anyway. There we go. So like I said before, we're gonna have to let this work. Gonna have to let this dry for about 30 minutes or so. I'm going to just let it run its program, and we'll come back and we'll see how they compare to the first one. If they're anything like this, then they'll be pretty happy. All right, so these are all finished now. These have been drying and curing for about 30 minutes. They're getting harder. They're not as squishy as they were when I first took them out. Just looking at surface finish, I think compared to the Prusa stuff, the surface finish is a little bit, it's hard to pick a word exactly, because it's not, like, it has a lot to do with the surface finishes, like the overall, like the color, everything, compared to the transparent stuff. With the transparent, I imagine I was missing some surface issues, probably, as compared to the opaque. So, I don't know, it's really hard to assess. Obviously, the real test is going to be how well it casts into metal and what kind of ash, burnout, and all that other stuff we get. But anyway, so you see there's a little bit of D-lam right there, as mentioned before, but no biggie. I think I'm just going to fill that in with wax, and we'll cast these as is. I still have to add sprues, so maybe I'll make that a priority if it's on most of them. This one doesn't have any, but if it becomes a problem, I'll just aim for that spot with the sprue. We'll fill it in with wax, and it should pretty much disappear. So let's get these all sprued up. Hey guys, so we're just doing the Resin Works pour at the moment. I'm just about to pull the flask out of the burnout oven. The metal is pretty much up to temp. I think it's cycling a little bit, and we're pretty much ready to go. So let's get this going. It's really good. The silver just solidified, so it had like a second to be molten, which means that it most likely all got down to where it needed to be because it didn't pull anything in. So yeah, it looks good. I think it'll be a good cast. I like to put the ingot mold on top of the melter. With my particular melter, I noticed that it kind of warps a little bit, like there isn't a perfect seal. So I'll put this on top and that weighs it down enough, and it makes that seal along the bottom really, really clean, or almost zero. And it keeps the oxygen out of the actual chamber while the graphite crucible is cooling. So basically it just makes the crucible last a little bit longer, I think. So it's a pretty cold day today. It's like the first day of, second day of October actually. So it's not quite, frozen cold yet, but it's getting pretty close. So I'm gonna let this sit for maybe 5 minutes. Typically you let them sit for a little bit longer, but because it's cold, it's gonna cool off faster. Crucible or flasks tend to cool at about 100 degrees per minute. That's from the outside in, obviously. So with the molten metal, that probably bumped it up a little bit. I'm gonna let it sit for a little bit and before we quench it into the water, and we'll see what we got. So I'm using R&R Ultra Vest with band dust. We'll see how well this works. I haven't had any problems with R&R. Pretty much right around the time I started getting into casting. That was when Kerr was a brand, stopped selling satin cast. They would sell it by like the 100-pound tub, and it was very, very affordable, and it was simple, and pretty much everyone used it. But anyway, they went out of business, or they decided to get out of that business. I don't think they actually stopped, like the business didn't die. But anyway, they stopped selling it, so I just decided I was gonna go with the Ultra Vest. And this was my first batch of band dust. And as great as the band dust is, it keeps the dust out of the air, so it keeps the studio cleaner, a little bit healthier in the long run. I find that it clumps, and I could see it as soon as I brought it up. You see, barely any of the investment actually broke off. It's very cakey. Poof! Oh yeah, look at that. Perfect. So fast. So this is kind of what I meant by cakey. Like, it does get into every detail, but unlike my experience so far with the Ultra Vest, like the normal stuff without band dust, this stuff tends to not release as nicely. But oh well. I mean, it just means I gotta clean it out a little bit more time. I'm actually thinking about building a pressure washing station just so I can gun all this stuff out. But gotta wait and find a decent pressure washer. But I'm not sure if you can see that. Yeah, a little bit. So like there's the tiny details. There's the UW up there. These are like, we're talking point something millimeter depth. So the detail is good. And the obviously this whole video is actually about the 3D model, and like this resin has exceeded my expectations. Obviously I still have to get it out of all this stuff to take a look, but just preliminary, I'm not seeing any porosity. I'm not seeing any signs that ash was built up in the flask and didn't get quite removed. It looks very clean. I'll be able to see more later, but overall I'm very pleased. So once again, this was the Resin Works castable material, 3D printing material, and I'm very pleased with it. If you're a Canadian, and I know this really only applies to Canadians, if you're Canadian and you want to do this kind of stuff, it's a good place to start. Casting resin is never cheap no matter where you go, but at least if you're Canadian and you want to buy
within Canada to avoid duty or import, whatever, then there's a viable option for you.